thanks to this kind of legislation, now we can be transparent and fully open and say Metified gamifies a global competition amongst humans and AI to make a sport out of predicting asset price movements. And we do that through our own token. And now that President Trump and the administration have come forward with this legislation, we can get to work, just like a lot of founders that have been waiting to hear this.
What weren't you able to do before this?
So we were able to understand the movement of asset prices and run AI models against the trends and trades that are going on in the market. But now what we're able to do is link it up with what's going on in the real financial markets and add value to allowing people to be accurate and early in predicting these asset price movements.
How do you see the recent U.S. stablecoin legislation shaping the market? Could possibly tighter oversight drive stablecoin issuers offshore?
I actually don't think so. I think this is a great thing for the market, because the requirement of the Clarity Act and now the regulation framework around the Genius Act is that stable tokens now have to be backed 1-to-1. So what I think you're going to see is stable tokens that adopt the U.S. regulations will be the ones that are trusted, and people will see them as a viable on-ramp to link the digital asset world with the traditional finance system.
What is your view on CBDCs? We have President Trump earlier, just minutes ago, saying that he will cement an order banning CBDCs. This seems to be always kind of hand in hand with stablecoins when it comes to conversations or discourse in this space.
Yeah, so what I think the administration is making clear on that is that you're going to have the innovation in the hands of builders and entrepreneurs. And what they're not going to do is turn the currency itself into a surveillance mechanism, which if a CBDC were to become available in some other countries and were adopted, I think people would be a little hesitant to get involved with it, because all that's doing is letting people track your move and turn you off from the financial system whenever you run afoul of saying something somebody doesn't like or take an unfavorable position. What this does is decentralizes the authority a little bit into the hands of builders and investors.
If you're watching on YouTube or Bloomberg Originals right now, you can see the president is about to sign S1582, the Genius Act. He's in the East Room of the White House. He's surrounded by people within the crypto industry, lawmakers who've been supporters of the crypto industry. You heard him call out a few of the people who were there: Brian Armstrong of Coinbase, the Winklevoss twins of Gemini, in addition to Vlad Tenev of Robinhood, David Sachs, the crypto and AI czar, there as well. I want to get back to Frank Speiser, CEO of Metified. Frank, what legislation would you like to see when it comes to regulating crypto that is not yet law?
Well, right now there's clarity in the Genius Act as to what is a commodity, which is Bitcoin and Ethereum tokens, and the pathway to define yourself as a security. But I'd like to see some more clarity and some more help in determining what's a utility, because a lot of founders are building things with utility that link the two systems together, that carry value, but have a clear utility to them and are not such the case that they're a security. So it would be really great to see that. But I actually anticipate that we'll be able to work with the government to evolve that. And they seem really open to being able to have a conversation now, where before it was a little less clear on how to make that happen.
It's a big day for the crypto crowd today, because the entire market cap of this space just hit $4 trillion, which is a big deal. So in light of that,
it's like the size of NVIDIA, right?
Yes, exactly. And really, the story got a lot of views. I see it on Twitter. Everyone's really celebrating. Do you think that macro factors like Fed policy, inflation, or rate cuts still affect the risk appetite? Or because of the maturation of this space, do you think they're kind of isolated and they have their own factors going on?
I think what we all just witnessed was the mainstreaming of crypto. So given what's happened in the markets recently, I think the stable tokens allow an on-ramp to connect people in their everyday lives to be able to use digital assets. They're going to find their way into assets like Bitcoin and other projects that are worth investing in. And I think what you're going to see is you'll start to see the continuation of the Bitcoin asset, especially, become unhinged from inflationary policy, or in some cases run counter to the markets, because the original intent of Bitcoin was to hedge against central bank inflation. And now with a way to on-ramp dollars into the asset in a digital format, like stable tokens like USDC trading into Bitcoin, you're going to see people understanding, well, when they're printing more money, maybe I'm going to move into an asset that hedges inflation like Bitcoin does, because there's a fixed supply and they're never going to make more than 21 million Bitcoin.
But how do you view Bitcoin? Because sometimes it behaves like a risk asset and moves in step with the NASDAQ, but sometimes it's a haven asset and behaves more like gold, and then Bitcoin lives up to its digital gold status. I feel like critics will say that it's still in the melding phase of discovering its role in a portfolio. What is your take on that?
Well, I think you're right in your observation there. Bitcoin has gone through several phases. So the first was it behaved like digital gold because there was a fixed and finite supply of buyers, and they were basically just voting a vote of no confidence in the inflationary aspects of the monetary system. And then what you saw was people investing in the speculative potential of Bitcoin. But now that it's becoming more and more mainstream, I think more and more people can look and say, well, if they're just going to keep printing more money and they're just going to keep sort of devaluing the purchasing power of my money, maybe I'm going to move some into a commodity that holds value and is non-inflationary. So I think we're moving back to the original intent, and it's just a phase shift of Bitcoin behaving like it was originally intended. I think it's going back that way.
Frank, I think it's fair to say there are people listening and watching right now who are not sold that crypto is even a good thing, not just for the United States, but also for their own portfolios. Sell it to them.
Well, first of all, let me say, not all crypto is great crypto. There's a lot of junk projects out there. There's a lot of nonsense floating around. Yeah, and it's but it's one of those things where you shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you look like the original Web 1.0 revolution, where there's a bunch of companies that came about that got a lot of hype and hoopla just because they added .com to the end of a dumb idea, right? That's essentially what we're leaving behind right now with crypto, where we're going to move into the potential of the technology to remit money across, various regulations and various economies in a very cheap and efficient manner. You're going to allow people to trace things by ownership through a blockchain. That's all great technology. And now with some clarity around how it's supposed to be used here in the United States, I think we can lead the way and show people that there are actually viable, great projects that follow the rules, and the technology itself is great technology because it allows you to be transparent about who's owned it before and who you're being transferred to. So you can shift compliance, you can make quick work out of chain of custody, and I think today is a real big step forward in getting us to where the potential of the technology is.
We're speaking with Frank Speiser. He's the CEO of Metified. Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, but Metified as a company has evolved in the last few years. Can you talk a little bit about that and the way that you've changed as the industry has changed?
Yeah, so we've always had an AI component to the company, and in understanding the movements of asset prices, but we started off as sort of a ratings company to help people understand which was a healthy asset, which was real, and which was, according to my last point, junk. And we wanted to do that to help people. But where we've landed now is there's a lot of movement and back and forth with these asset prices. And there's a real need to predict the movement of these prices through AI systems. We use neural networks to help predict the movement. But there's gaps that could be filled by people. And what we do is we gamify that competition, turn it into a sport of predicting, like the same way that video games have evolved to be a sport. And we help people fill the gaps in the machine predictions. And we found a real momentum right now, and we're moving to market very quickly. We'll be out in September, and people will be able to get into our games and participate in adding signal to the market and get real value for it.
It seems like that's what we see as the crypto landscape really just grows. Companies also learn to adjust. You earlier mentioned that not all crypto is good, and it's true. From where I sit, it seems like Bitcoin is still really the dominant coin when it comes to Wall Street interest. Are you seeing other coins like Ether, Solana, or XRP gaining traction as well when it comes to institutional interest?
Well, if you look at ETH, Ethereum, the Ethereum token has moved about 40% in the last month up. It's about 20% up for the week. And what that is a signal that the decentralized finance ecosystem, where all the innovation and smart contracts and stuff are happening, those are waking up, coming into the market. And so Ethereum is worth looking into if you're an investor, because it's indicating that people are developing new and innovative ways to interact with blockchains. Solana is a way to accelerate the speed and efficiency of transacting on the Ethereum network, so it's not so expensive. XRP has its own sort of purview of things. It's more institutional in the way that they're approaching things, and I think the jury's still out, so we could see where that goes. But it's a strong project, and it's worth paying attention to. But I think you're going to see applications evolve on top of the tokens themselves, because if you go back to the early days of the internet and people invented TCP/IP, for instance, no one walks up to you and says, "Hey, are you using TCP/IP?" They say, "No. Do you know Facebook? Do you know Google? Do you know Amazon?" So the way that things have evolved to help people's lives be better, be it faster, cheaper, easier, that's the next phase in what this is all going to bring.